Good day. My name is Steve. I'm an advanced life support paramedic and a clinical simulations facilitator. In this presentation, I'm hopefully going to draw a link between things that I do while teaching my students, as well as some of the academic theory that supports it. As a clinical simulations facilitator, there are fundamentally two main areas of focus. Firstly, I have to focus on developing the skills of the practitioner. Secondly, I have to focus on developing a systematic approach to clinical critical thinking. As a paramedic or an emergency care practitioner, we are often placed in a situation that is very time critical. And I believe that in order to be a successful or good paramedic, we need to be able to differentiate the tasks that require thinking and the tasks that require doing. I'm going to use an example. The process of putting up an IV line shouldn't require too much thinking. It's one of those things that becomes muscle memory as you become more and more practiced at doing it. You just learn how to put up the IV line. But then there's the question of why do you put up the IV line? We may need to start thinking critically about why do we put up the IV line? When do we put up the IV line? Who do we put the IV line up on? So two fundamental approaches are needed when it comes to training this. The one is to train people to do things. The other is to train students to think about why we do things and critically analyze and question, are we doing? What are we doing? Is it right that we're doing it? Is there something else we should be doing? As a pragmatist myself, I learn best with a mixture of different methodologies used to learn. And I acknowledge fully that some students prefer a pragmatic approach whereby we mix two of the methods. Some learners prefer to have very structured learning, while other learners prefer to be able to guide themselves. And I find this is particularly evident when we're dealing with adults who have got years of experience on many occasions, and many of them have more experience than I do. The notion of allowing learners to guide themselves is supported by Shunk in 2012. In chapter 8, he writes about motivation and he refers to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how an adult learner may be striving to achieve needs of esteem which manifest themselves in independence and high levels of achievement. If I can bring this into the classroom and improve motivation, I'll improve learning. When the task for the day is to develop clinical skills, my general approach is to be very behavioristic in nature. I set up skill stations that are very check sheet focused. The students are then afforded the opportunity to use repetition to practice skills until they've mastered the process. This behavioristic approach works extremely well in that it teaches a clinician how to perform the task, but doesn't necessarily teach them when or why they are doing it or when or why they should be doing it. It works particularly well with junior staff. Quite often, junior staff are very overwhelmed by a scene or overwhelmed by a scenario in which they're faced. And if they've mastered the skill without analyzing too closely why they're doing it, they they're still in a position to be able to perform the skill on a scene or in a real life scenario under the instruction or direction of a more senior clinician. Discussions regarding the whens and the whos and the whys uh, then happen later on during lessons regarding clinical thinking. On the other hand, when the task for the day is to develop clinical knowledge, theory, and general critical thinking, my approach is very humanistic in nature. We may start with a group like tabletop exercise where we all sit together and discuss a particular pathology and its possible treatments. We then move to the simulation lab and work through a scenario from beginning to end. Throughout the entire scenario, we'll stop multiple times and discuss each other's previous experiences and share pearls of wisdom that we have each picked up over the years. personally find this process very fulfilling, especially when I see a fellow student or colleague have a major light bulb moment. On most occasions, and this primarily depends on timing and how much conversation happened during the simulation, and how much sharing of experiences and debate happened during the simulation. But I usually try and follow a very structured debriefing process, as I find that this formalizes and solidifies any learning that's happened during the simulation process. In a literature review performed by Abelson et al. In 2014, they identified that simulation is a very useful tool to help students gain experience and develop critical thinking. They do, however, recommend that it is supported by other training and teaching methodologies. Simulation is a very useful tool for medical education in that it avoids many of the ethical concerns regarding students treating real life patients. Other methodologies that can be employed in conjunction with simulation include didactic lectures, tabletop exercises, and self reflection. All of these are very humanistic in approach. During the simulation process, if any issues regarding the performance of skills are identified, these are then discussed in a very humanistic manner. This method affords the learner the opportunity to have both a humanistic and behavioristic approach to skill learning. As mentioned previously, a formalized debriefing process is usually performed. This is done in a manner that creates a psychological safe environment. Decker et al. In 2013 report that in order for this to be accomplished, sufficient time needs to be allocated to both the simulation as well as the debriefing process, and that both observers as well as simulation participants should actively be involved. In conclusion, I believe, and this is supported by various pieces of evidence, that neither behaviorism nor humanism should be employed exclusively in the process of paramedic training. Both methodologies have their places, and as I grow as a facilitator, I will endeavour to ensure that I use as many methodologies as possible where appropriate. Thanks very much.